Fallen for you. Chapter summary. Adrian finds himself both irresistibly drawn to Marinette's scent and dismayed at his apparently weakening inhibitions regarding social conventions and personal space around her. Neither Nino nor Aaliyah fail to take notice, and Chloe ends up causing a scene. If only he knew what a thrill his increased closeness brings Marinette. But what do Nino and Aaliyah know that he doesn't? And how can he perform so well at basketball tryouts when he's been a useless mess during class? During lunch period, Marinette takes some time to give herself a hand as she fantasizes about Adrian, only for Chat Noir to invade her fantasies. When she finds herself wanting to share more with her partner, she realizes she might just be falling for him. Saturday came and went in a hazy blur, with Marinette's head filled with even more daydreams than usual, because Adrian wasn't the only one on her mind anymore. There he was, as always, sitting one row in front of her, seemingly oblivious to the power he held over her heart. While Chat Noir's kiss still lingered in her mind's eye, a moment so incredibly powerful, it made her lips tingle and her heart flutter every time she replayed it. If she got anything done that day, she couldn't remember it. On Sunday, Marinette slept in until 11 a.m. and then worked on homework until 2 p.m., when Aaliyah came over to hang out for the afternoon. Adrian became the first topic of conversation. He may not realize it yet, but Adrian is beginning to fall for you, I know it. Aaliyah said excitedly. Your big reunion on our first day back was just the beginning. What you need to do is find subtle ways to show him that you enjoy his attention so he'll keep upping his game, and when it looks like he's ready to start making a move to win your heart, you can start making a move on him. After that, it's only a matter of time before one of you confesses to the other. It's a win-win. That all makes sense, I guess, Marinette said slowly. But it sounds like I still need to stay cool around Adrian, and that's a skill I still need to improve. And if anything goes wrong, he could end up freaking out and hating me. Girl, he's not gonna hate you. You couldn't make him hate you even if you wanted to. If Adrian started acting all awkward because he was trying to put the moves in you, you wouldn't hate him for it, right? Of course not. Marinette exclaimed. Adrian's so good with people, there's no way he could freak me out. So you gotta believe there's no way you can mess it up, either. Aaliyah said with a firm nod. If Adrian's got a crush on you, which, if he doesn't already, he will, then you can't fail. Now, wanna hear how to get this thing started? Sure. Marinette was nervous, since Aaliyah's ideas tended to be much more daring than hers. Ever were, but if it would help her win over Adrian, she had to at least consider it. So, tomorrow morning, you are going to wait for Adrian outside so that you can be the first person to say good morning to him, and maybe have a conversation on your way to class. Ask him how his summer was, maybe. He'll be thinking about you all day. Quote. That's your plan? Marinette asked. I thought there would be more. That's the beginning. Aaliyah corrected. One thing at a time, dear child. Baby steps. Well, then, Marinette sighed. It sounds like something I should be able to pull off, but knowing me, I'll find a way to trip over my own feet and forget how to speak French the minute I see him. But you'll give it your best shot, right? Aaliyah asked, raising an eyebrow. I've got nothing to lose by trying. Marinette tried to sound as determined as possible, in the hope of boosting her confidence. At the very least, I'll be one of the first people he sees. Tilda. On the very same day, Adrian sat down with Natalie to go over his class schedule so she could start organizing his other regular activities and see when the best times to schedule photo shoots would be for the rest of the semester. The rest of the afternoon he spent finishing the rest of his homework, including some Chinese review worksheets. It made Adrian feel a little paranoid because he had begun to expect Hawkmoth to akumatize someone every day for no other reason other than that it would be the worst case scenario. He Knew he should feel relieved, because the less often he and Ladybug had to meet, the more slowly their symptoms would develop, but he didn't want to lure into a false sense of security. Plus, he really wanted to talk to Ladybug about the mating cycle and how they were going to handle it. Plag pointed out more than once that there was no rush, their symptoms wouldn't get much worse over a few days if they didn't see each other during the time. Adrian tried to let Plag reassure him, but he couldn't shake this near constant feeling of restlessness, almost impatience. He and Ladybug obviously hadn't done the best job following their Kwami's advice, but Hawkmoth hadn't forced them to meet every day the way Plag had feared he would, either. Hopefully, this meant they were somewhat on track to keeping the rest of the cycle mild, right? Monday, September 5th. Monday began the same way as any other. The car pulled up to the curb in front of the school, and Adrian stepped out to join the half a dozen or so other students heading for the main entrance. Before he had reached the stairs, however, he caught sight of Marinette sitting on the bottommost steps. She was probably waiting for someone, but it looked like she was fidgeting, whether out of nerves or excitement, he couldn't tell. He found himself approaching the stairs slowly and carefully, as if she was a woodland animal he didn't want to startle. She caught sight of him a few seconds later, and instantly sat up straight as a board, her eyes wide and her hands tucked between her knees. He was forcibly reminded of a wild rabbit. Suddenly feeling self-conscious, Adrian stopped and waved at her, putting on his warmest smile. "Hi, Marinette." He greeted her. "Are you waiting for Ayla?" Hi. Adrian." "Hi." She answered shyly, scratching her cheek. No, not. Not Aaliyah, I was, She bit her bottom lip slightly and started fidgeting again, her eyes darting around. Nervously and her brows furrowing. He frowned at her slightly in concern. She seemed really nervous about something. I didn't mean to put you on the spot or anything," he assured her, holding up a placating hand. "I was just, curious." "Oh, no. Marinette rushed to add, standing up suddenly. "You didn't do anything. I was just, ah." She buried her face in her hands and groaned. Adrian was starting to worry a little bit at this point. She seemed so distressed. "Hey, are you okay?" Hoping he wouldn't scare her, Adrian leaned forward and touched a hand to her shoulder. She looked up at him, her expression anxious, but at least not scared, as far as he could tell. "You seem really anxious. Is something wrong?" She blinked at him, glancing briefly at his hand on her shoulder. He noticed her eyes seemed shinier than usual, and her face was slightly flushed. While Marinette sometimes had trouble putting together a coherent sentence, at least around him, she was also one of the sweetest people he knew, incredibly talented, and fiercely loyal when it came to supporting her friends. Sometimes he felt like he still hadn't figured her out, like there was still a lot more to her that he hadn't gotten to know yet. And yet, somehow he felt he could tell that she wasn't feeling herself right now. It hurt to see her looking so down. She stared back at him for a moment, her brow relaxing a little. Very slowly, her hand came up. Hesitantly, and uncertainty, and then unexpectedly came to rest on top of his own on her shoulder. His heart fluttered excitedly at the innocent touch, and he beamed at her when she managed a grateful smile. "Thanks for worrying about me," she murmured. I don't know what's up with me today. I guess I just feel jumpier than usual, or maybe anxious, like you said. But I'm okay. I think." "I'm glad to hear that," Adrian said, relaxing now that she seemed calmer. Her smile still looked a little tremulous, but it was warm and sweet, and it made him a little giddy. Really, she was a warm and sweet person. In fact, she smelled sweet. He leaned just a tiny bit more and tried to surreptitiously catch her scent. It was sweet, he couldn't figure out what it reminded him of. It wasn't perfume, he would recognize the smell of ethanol. It was probably a combination of her natural scent and the scent of whatever hair products she used. It was subtle and unassuming, but for some reason, it just drew him in. Quote dot dot dot. Adrian. He gasped, his head jerking back, and he realized he must have been in a daze, with his nose way too close to her face to be ignored. What the hell are you doing? Ah. Sorry. Sorry, I. He took his hand back and scratched the back of his neck, blushing. Furiously, he could feel it. I don't know what came over me, it's okay. She squeaked, holding out her hands in an attempt to reassure him somehow. I'm not mad, or freaked out, or anything. Adrian stared at her dubiously. Marinette, you really don't have to say that, he said. I might not know what's wrong with me today, but that's no excuse for acting like a creep. He cringed. You're not a creep, Marinette exclaimed, actually frowning at him now. Really, I'm not mad. She pressed her lips together but actually leaned in and tilted her head questioningly. Were you sniffing me? Adrian felt his face burn with shame and found it very difficult to meet her eyes. She only sounded curious, but he winced at the thought of admitting to his offense. I guess so. He forced out. His voice was rising in pitch with every word. He spoke. You smell really nice, and I guess I was curious. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted just slightly into a tiny, oh, of surprise. She was blushing. But his eyes were drawn to her mouth, which was looking very kissable right now. Adrian, what the hell? And then she actually smiled bashfully, and murmured, thank you, Adrian. Was she seriously flattered? He was not worthy. Marinette, please, stop being so cute, it's messing with my head. He groaned internally. They both jumped when the school bell rang, signaling the start of classes. Oh, no, we're gonna be late, Marinette cried. Come on. They raced up the stairs and tore through the hall to their classroom, gasping for breath a little as Marinette flung the door open, only to trip and fall on her face. Adrian tripped over her ankles and hit the floor right after her, landing with an arm over her back and a leg tangled up with hers. Adrian heard several people, mostly girls, giggle at the sight of them on the ground, while the teacher peered over his desk at them with his eyebrows raised. Glad you two could join us, he remarked lightly. Take care on your way to your seats, won't you? Adrian couldn't remember the last time he had embarrassed himself in public, and his stomach was already punishing him for it. He'd be lucky if he had an appetite for lunch today. Tilda tilda tilda. Aaliyah nailed Marinette with a sly leer that said, you will tell me everything later. As she sat down in a daze, deciding whether to be more embarrassed or thrilled at the fact that Adrian had fallen on top of her in front of the whole class would normally have taken all of her brainpower at the moment, but her head was already spinning with the even more mind-blowing fact that Adrian had sniffed at her because he thought she smelled nice. And that was in addition to the fact that he had cared enough to notice how nervous she was and ask if she was okay. He had actually worried about her. He's so sweet, she thought giddily. He has a heart of gold and the most beautiful soul in the world. Oh my god, I love him so much. Maybe the conversation hadn't gone the way she intended, but somehow, the interaction still felt like a victory. She managed to convince him it was okay to like how she smelled, right? Now if only I could work up the courage to smell him, she thought. I bet he smells like sunshine, whatever that smells like. Tilda tilda tilda. Adrian, meanwhile, felt like he was on the verge of a psychotic break. Why? Why would you do that? Why? Why? You are a civilized human being. You can't just get in girls' faces and sniff them, even if they smell nice. You know better than this. You are not a cat. Wait, a cat. It hit him. But it couldn't be the mating cycle. But it only attracts ladybug and I to each other. Nobody else, right? Unless, maybe it's another cat thing. But why Marinette? I haven't done anything weird around anyone else. Did Plag forget to tell me something? Or are my symptoms suddenly getting worse? More quickly than he thought they would. I hope he has an explanation for this. It didn't take Adrian very long to realize he would need to ask Nino for his notes later, no matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't focus on the lecture. Marinette, his classmate, his friend, the girl he had just tried to sniff earlier, was sitting right behind him. How was he supposed to concentrate? It seemed like his ears were hyper-focused on her, like his brain had decided she was the only thing worth listening to. He couldn't actually hear her against the atmospheric noise of the classroom and the droning of the teacher's voice, and yet his ears kept straining to catch every sound she made that they could. Tilde tilde tilde. When the final bell rang at the end of the day, Adrian scrambled to gather his things as quickly as possible so that he could escape the classroom before Marinette could pass his row. He completely forgot to worry about how his behavior might look to others. Dude, Nino said, watching Adrian with one eyebrow raised. What's the rush? Huh. Adrian froze, glancing at Nino. Nothing, no rush. I just, Nino blinked, then crossed his arms, clearly dubious. Well, you look like you expect a bomb to go off any minute, he remarked. He glanced towards Chloe's seat, where she was absorbed in something on her phone. Or for Chloe to jump you and kidnap you, he added, chuckling. Adrian blinked, then laughed nervously. Chloe was rarely on his mind for any significant stretch of time, and today he could have forgotten about everyone in the classroom except Marinette. She should know better than to try anything like that, he chuckled, shouldering his bag. Nino scooted sideways and stood up to let Adrian get out of his seat. Adrian heard Marinette whispering something to Aaliyah in a squeaky voice as both girls got out of their seats. He clamped down on the impulse to stop and look at them. Don't stop and stare. Nino is watching you, your ride is waiting for you, just start walking. Wah. He reacted entirely by reflex, so fast he couldn't have had any time to think. He dropped his bag, letting the shoulder strap slip off his shoulder, spun around, and caught Marinette in his arms. He was forced to step back with one foot to brace himself against her momentum. She had clearly tripped while walking down the steps behind him. Her chin had clipped his left shoulder on the way down, and her left arm was pinned against his chest. He was lucky she hadn't knocked the wind out of him, or brought him tumbling down the steps with her. Whoa. You okay? He asked, pushing her back onto her feet with his hands at her waist. Yeah, you're fine. You're amazing, Marinette murmured in a dazed tone of voice as she focused her eyes on his face. I mean, whoa, that was you. I mean, yeah, I'm okay. She babbled, turning bright pink. Her left hand was still touching him, and there was that sweet scent of her again. Adrian pulled her into a hug and nuzzled his nose and right cheek against the side of her neck. Good, I'm glad, he said, gently breathing in the smell of her skin. That could have been a nasty fall. Well, Marinette murmured somewhere next to his head. As long as you're around, I don't have to worry too much, right? Her voice still sounded dazed. Adrian felt his face flush, but the wonderful bubble he and Marinette were in was popped by the sound of Chloe's voice from across the classroom. Excuse you, she yelled. But nobody said you could fling yourself at Adrian just because he's strong and has amazing reflexes. Adrian's head snapped back, away from Marinette. He was now blushing bright red with the humiliation of Chloe looking at them, but the way she had just shouted at Marinette really irritated him. So much so, that he stubbornly left his hands at Marinette's waist as he turned his head to look Chloe in the face as he scowled in disapproval. Chloe, she obviously tripped, Adrian said incredulously. Excuse me if I didn't let her break her nose on the steps. Yeah, you tell her, Nino murmured in agreement. Chloe looked like she had been slapped in the face. Several people laughed at her, and Adrian felt no sympathy, though he was vaguely aware of his conscience nagging at him in a panic for drawing attention to himself. Now that you mention it, though, Chloe, Ayla piped up, I'm sure we'd all be happy to let you fall on your face if you throw yourself at any of us. Your daddy could afford all the hospital bills. And plastic surgery, right? More laughter. Chloe stood up, her face contorted with rage. Oh, well, aren't you all just so witty and hilarious? She snarled, glaring at Nino, then at Aaliyah, then at Marinette. Don't think you're special, Marinette Dupan Chang. You're just lucky. Adrian's nice to everyone. Seemingly satisfied with having the last word, Chloe turned and stormed out of the classroom. Adrian's mouth fell open in shock. What had Marinette ever done for Chloe to hate her so much? He looked at Marinette. She was watching Chloe go with an angry scowl on her face, but she didn't seem hurt, like she had taken Chloe's insults personally. In the background, he could hear the rest of the class gathering ready to leave, but he made no move to leave Marinette's side. He felt like he had to stay, he just wasn't sure why. Marinette heaved a deep sigh, and then looked up at Adrian. Thanks for standing up for me, Adrian, she said, smiling sweetly. And thanks again for catching me. She tucked a loose lock of hair behind her ear. Adrian's eyes followed the movement of her hand, then lingered for a moment on her still pink cheeks, and then finally came to rest on her lips, pink, glossy, so soft looking, and still stretched in a soft smile. Suddenly, she started in surprise and glanced down to where his hand was still there. Now at the small of her back, as if to pull her closer. Oh my god, get a fucking grip, Adrian. He jerked it away as if electrocuted. Sorry, I must have spaced out for a second. He blurted. You can't even keep your paws to yourself, now. For shame. Marinette stared at him curiously. No, you're fine. It's fine. I'm fine, she said vaguely. She glanced around the classroom self-consciously. Many people had left by now, and most of those that remained were remarkably not staring, which Adrian was very relieved to see. Guessing Marinette had simply trailed off, he bent down and picked up his messenger bag. When he straightened up, however, he found Marinette hadn't moved, and was now leaning forward just slightly, as if she were about to ask him something. He froze, his hand still on the shoulder strap of his bag after slinging it over his shoulder, and stared back at her. What? He asked faintly. It felt like her eyes were sucking him in. And he swore he was almost close enough to smell her again. She straightened up, looked away, but smiled shyly. Sorry. She squeaked softly. Slowly and hesitantly, she started descending the stairs past him. And Adrian thought for sure she would keep going. But then she paused, just past him and slightly behind his left shoulder. You smell nice, too. She whispered timidly. And then kept walking. Adrian whipped around, but Marinette had already scuttled out of the classroom. His heart gave a strange wiggle, and he could feel himself blushing. What just happened? Dude, did she break you? Adrian vaguely registered the sound of Nino's voice right behind him. And the sensation of him gently shaking his left shoulder. What? Adrian asked stupidly. Yeah, sounds like she kinda broke you. Nino slipped past him and turned to face him, shouldering his bag. But, what actually happened? What did she say? Adrian tried to jumpstart his brain, but he couldn't even remember why he had been leaving the classroom in the first place. Was school over? The bell had rung, right? But what for? Maybe we should save the interrogation until later when our boy can talk properly. That was Alia's voice, also coming up behind him. Before he could turn to look at her, she threw an arm around his shoulders and leaned in conspiratorially. I may not know exactly what's going on yet, she murmured right next to his face. But it looks like you're doing a good job. Keep it up. Wah. Before Adrian could turn his head to look at Aaliyah properly, her arm was gone, and she was strutting past Nino on her way out of the classroom. Adrian rounded on Nino. What was that all about? He demanded. She just said, "It looks like I'm doing a good job." What is she talking about? Nino looked completely baffled for a moment, then thoughtful, then his eyes started darting from side to side, and he looked suspiciously panicky. "Nino," Adrian said warningly, "what do you know that I don't?" Nino sighed and gave him an apologetic grimace. "Nino. Bro, I don't know for sure," Nino said uncomfortably. "But I've kinda been sworn to secrecy. If it has something to do with me, then I think I oughta know," Adrian said indignantly. I know, Nino was clearly feeling really conflicted. It's also about somebody else, and I swore to Aaliyah I would keep it a secret." Adrian sighed. "Okay, just, unless I have basketball or fencing after this, my ride's probably been waiting for me for a while now, so I should get going, but I might call you later." "Yeah, sure," Nino said, smiling. "Later, dude. See ya." Adrian exchanged a fist bump with Nino, and then hurriedly dug out his phone as his best friend left the classroom. He was late for basketball tryouts. Great. Tilda tilde tilde. Adrian actually felt like he had done extremely well, and he was almost positive he would make the team. Now that he was thinking about his mating cycle again, though, he suddenly wondered. Was it strange that thoughts of Ladybug hadn't distracted him during tryouts? He felt like he had really been in the zone the whole time, but during class, it seemed like he couldn't concentrate on anything. Why? Was he overthinking it? Guess that's one more thing I'll have to ask Plag about, he thought. He shouldered his duffel bag, shut the door to his locker, and headed out to meet Natalie and the gorilla for his ride home. Tilda tilde tilde. Marinette had barely made it past the school entrance when her phone rang. Digging it out of her purse, she realized she should have known the scene she caused in the classroom would have Aaliyah hot on her tail. "I guess I should be grateful she didn't run me down in the hallway," she thought, tapping answer on her phone and bringing up to her ear as she walked. "Hello. Girl, where did you disappear to? What happened with Adrian? You have to tell me everything." "Sorry," Marinette said, wincing from the volume of Alia's voice. "I wasn't trying to escape you. I swear, I just had to get out of the classroom. I couldn't take everyone starting at us anymore, and I didn't want to embarrass Adrian any more than I already had." "No offense taken," Aaliyah assured her, "as long as you tell me everything that happened between you two, outside before school, and in the classroom. It's thanks to my plan you ended up on the floor with him this morning somehow, right?" Marinette felt her face turn red faster than a traffic light. "Choice of words matters, Aaliyah." "Ah, don't remind me." Marinette groaned. "That was so embarrassing. For Adrian, too, I'm sure. Maybe, but it was also hilarious," Aaliyah said with a laugh. "Like something straight out of a Disney movie. But tell me what happened before that, when you met him outside." Well, Marinette thought back to her morning encounter with Adrian and took a moment to get her thoughts straight in her head, wanting to give Aaliyah as many details as possible. "As soon as he saw me, he said hi and waved at me," she began hopefully. "He asked if I was waiting for you, and I said no, but I didn't know what to say after that, so, of course, I started babbling like a fool again," she continued, now sounding bummed. "In fact, it was so bad, he actually tried to apologize for putting me on the spot with his innocent question." She whined. "Geez, you must have been really freaking out," Aaliyah said sympathetically. "I guess starting a conversation with him all by yourself is still a really big step." "That's the problem, Aaliyah, it shouldn't be this hard. I've been crushing on him for over a year now, and I haven't gotten any better at talking to him." "Hey, don't beat yourself up. There's always next time," Aaliyah said bracingly. "But what happened next?" "I told him he didn't do anything wrong, but I was just so frustrated with myself that I felt like I Was about to cry, and I really didn't want to cry in front of Adrian. It would have made him feel even worse. Maybe. But did you hold it together? Yeah, mostly, Marinette replied. But I'm pretty sure he noticed I was feeling upset. He touched my shoulder and asked me if I was okay. And, somehow that calmed me down a little. I. Marinette's voice softened, and she blushed a little at the memory. I touched his hand, and I thanked him for worrying about me. How did I work up the courage to do that? She wondered. I just suddenly felt calmer, out of nowhere. What, really? Wow. Aaliyah exclaimed. Good for you. Did he take it well? Yeah, he smiled really big at me, she sighed. But then, she paused, recalling the way Adrian's face had slackened and his eyes had gone out of focus. And then, he seemed to get really distracted by something. I couldn't tell what part of my face he was looking at anymore, and then he leaned in really, really slowly towards me. She remembered his eyes fluttering closed, and hearing the soft sound of him slowly breathe in her scent. And then this is gonna sound really weird, but, he sniffed me. What? Aaliyah asked. Sniffed, you. Seriously. That's kinda weird. I know, it was strange, Marinette said thoughtfully. But it was kind of interesting. Somehow. He seemed like he was almost in a trance. He seemed to completely forgot I was watching him. And when I said his name, he got totally startled. And then he got really, really apologetic for spacing out, as he put it, and made it sound like he didn't even realize what he was doing. But when I asked him, he admitted that I smelled nice. Marinette's voice grew excited. He thinks I smell nice. That's good, right? I mean, yeah, totally. Aaliyah said. It's just kinda weird for him to try to smell you out of the blue like that. It seems like the kinda thing you'd do when you're alone and in the mood to cuddle. And you two haven't even started dating yet. Yeah, that makes sense, Marinette mused. Honestly, though, I can't say that I minded. It was flattering. I told him I wasn't mad or freaked out, but he said I didn't have to say that to try to make him feel better, because he thought he was acting like a creep. Even though he didn't even know what was going on with him. Aaliyah didn't answer right away. Marinette frowned, even though Aaliyah couldn't see her expression of suspicious disappointment. You don't actually think he was acting like a creep, do you? She demanded indignantly. I know he's not a creep, Aaliyah said quickly, but it could have looked creepy to someone who didn't know him. Like I said, you just don't sniff people you're not dating out in public like that. And for him to act like he didn't even realize he was doing it. Very strange. I know it's strange, Marinette said. But what could it mean? Who knows, Aaliyah mused. But what happened next? I told him very firmly that he wasn't a creep, Marinette said proudly. But I asked him. She trailed off. Had she really been brave enough to ask him if he had sniffed her? How? I asked him if he really did just sniff me. You asked him to his face. Aaliyah gasped. I know. I don't why I suddenly got so brave. But I did, and he admitted he did. He was super embarrassed about it. But that's when he said I smelled nice. Marinette grinned dreamily at the memory. So, I thanked him for the compliment. She added happily. Well, Aaliyah exclaimed. It sounds like you managed to get plenty out of the encounter even though you had a rough start. Congrats. Marinette giggled. Thanks. She said. But tell me about what happened after class. Aaliyah urged. I saw him catch you when you fell. And then he frickin' hugged you. I know. Marinette squealed. He said he was glad I was okay, because it could have been a nasty fall, he said, but Marinette paused to draw a shaky breath as she felt herself blush even more at the memory of his arms around her and his breath at her neck. But he caught me against him, with his arms around me, and I felt him smell me again on my neck. She gushed in a hushed voice. And I could smell him, too, and he smelled Sinise. Actually, she added thoughtfully, I swear he kinda smelled a little like some kind of cheese. I Don't which kind, exactly, but. Cheese. Aaliyah echoed. That doesn't sound it would smell nice at all, but, hey, if you don't mind, I guess that's all that matters. And if you can figure out what kind of cheese it is, you could bring him some for lunch. They say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Maybe I will. Marinette mused. Also, I plan to call Nino later and see what I can find out from him about what Adrian's thinking. Aaliyah added smugly. But Aaliyah, I don't want him to know I have a crush on Adrian. Marinette whined. There was silence for a few seconds from Aaliyah's end. Girl, Nino figured out you like his best friend last year, she said. You really don't hide it, Barry. Well, and after we started dating, he became my partner in crime. How do you think we pulled off Operation Lovebirds Reunion with you two at the beginning of this year? Marinette took a moment to digest this. You're not mad at me, are you? Aaliyah asked. And no, I'm not mad, just embarrassed, Marinette mumbled. He won't tell Adrian, will he? No, I made him swear not to, Aaliyah assured her. He's just keeping an eye out for future signs. That Adrian is falling for you, and help steer your boy in the right direction. We've both got your back now, girl. Okay. I guess that's good. Marinette said, approaching the corner of her street. I'll leave Nino to you, then. Let me know if he has anything interesting to tell us about Adrian, okay? Will do. Aaliyah chirped. I gotta call Nino before I get started on homework. Talk to y'all later. Okay. Marinette replied cheerfully. Bye. Tilda tilde tilde. Marinette knew she should probably get started on her homework before dinner, but her head was still filled with thoughts of Adrian. His gorgeous face, the smell of his skin, and the warmth of his arms around her. Tiki flew up to settle on the bookshelf that made up the headboard of Marinette's bed, as Marinette climbed up to sprawl herself on her bed. She sighed dreamily and thought back to that moment in the classroom. Even if Adrian had just been trying to catch her, and it was just the way she had ended up falling. Being held in his arms like that. His arms wrapped around her waist, her arms pinned awkwardly against his chest, her cheek brushing the side of his neck, and her chin throbbing from clipping his shoulder. It now placed second on her list of best moments with Adrian Agreste, right below the hug he had given her afterward as he nuzzled her cheek. She still wasn't sure where exactly all of this impulsive affection was coming from, but it had to mean something really good, right? And maybe Aaliyah was right and it meant he was falling for her. Maybe this year would be the year. Now I know for a fact that Adrian gives the most amazing hugs. She thought. Oh, to be scooped up into his loving embrace. And he could nuzzle me, like he did today, and give me neck kisses. Oh yes, neck kisses are heaven. Well, at least that's what I've read. I wonder how much Adrian likes neck kisses. Marinette had exactly zero knowledge of what kind of lover Adrian was, she could only imagine. Based on what she knew about his personality. He was so wonderfully kind and caring, and respectful. Oh, he was so loving, she was sure of it. Marinette let out a barely audible sigh and blushed as she imagined him hovering over her as she lay beneath him, gazing at her in awe and in love, an expression she had some difficulty picturing clearly, as she had never seen what it looked like on his face in real life. He would be spellbound by the sight of her naked body spread invitingly before him, and he would touch her reverently as he whispered to her how beautiful she was. He would be carefully attentive, watching her and listening to learn what made her feel good. He would be careful not to hurt her, of course, but he would relish the act of touching her, of filling her with such pleasure that she couldn't stay silent, nor stop her body from shuddering and writhing from the sensations that threatened to overwhelm her. Marinette could feel her heart hammering wildly and her face glowing red between her thighs. She could feel her vulva growing hot and damp with arousal. The muscles of her core kept shuddering involuntarily, raw nerve endings tingling and burning for attention. Tiki. Marinette murmured shyly. Can I have some privacy? Of course, Tiki said kindly from behind her head. She zipped past her face, over the side of her bed, and out of sight below. I'll be under the pillow on the chaise. Marinette undid the button and zipper of her shorts and pushed them along with her panties as far down her legs as she could reach and then kicked them off. She spread her legs wide and shivered as her exposed sex met the open air. After a moment, she decided to shed her shirt and bra as well. She cupped her breasts in both hands and massaged them, slowly rolling her nipples with her thumbs, taking her time building up her arousal as she pictured Adrian shirtless above her. Bless you, Gabriel swimwear ads, she thought. She imagined it was his hands caressing her instead of her own, continuing to massage her left with one and trailing down her body with the other end, stroking the inside of her thigh. She brought her hand to her aching sex, massaging her folds with her fingers. She was squirming slightly now, her hips rocking minutely forward and backward in a desperate, reflexive search for relief. Finished with teasing herself, she finally placed 2 fingers just above her clit on either side of it, and began rubbing in fast, tight circles. Deep inside her core, her muscles were already fluttering, spastically squeezing on nothing over and over as she stroked herself closer and closer towards her release. Her breath was coming in soft pants, sometimes catching and shuddering every time her heart gave a throb or flutter. Marinette tried to imagine as clearly as possible what Adrian's face would look like as he watched her pant and writhe beneath him in ecstasy. She pictured him smiling down at her, with more love and warmth than she had ever seen before in his face in real life, and her already foggy brain almost blew a fuse. His normal, everyday smiles were already so warm and sweet and gentle. But a smile from Adrian that only showed itself to a lover trying to focus this blessed image in her mind sent a flash of heat throbbing through her whole body, and she failed to fully stifle the giddy coo that escaped her just then. Oh, to see him look at her like a goddess to be worshipped, she could barely imagine what a flood of emotion the sight would bring her, perhaps just as incredible as the flood of emotion he might feel to see her, Marinette, coming undone by his touch. She was close, now, so close. She kept holding her breath to stifle the little whimpers and moans that threatened to escape her in the throes of her pleasure. Swirling her fingertips as vigorously as she could against her clit, she imaged Adrian, his gaze heated with desire and anticipation, lower himself down over her. Supporting himself on one forearm, he rocked forward to capture her lips in a heated kiss, and moaned happily against her mouth. This time, she didn't have to imagine what it felt like to kiss him, or what his moan sounded like. She knew, she remembered, because she had done that with Chat Noir, and the memory was so much better than a fantasy. Wait, what? Marinette froze, her hand still, and her body rioted at the sudden loss of stimulation. So close to the finish line. She groaned in frustration, squeezing her eyes shut. No, I'm so close. Why? That stupid cat with his stupid warm hugs and stupid cute purring and stupid sweet kisses and stupid arg, let me fantasize about Adrian in peace. You weren't invited. But she just couldn't bring herself to let the orgasm she craved so much slip out of her reach, and barely 2 seconds later, her fingers were back to rubbing frantic circles again. Imagining Chat Noir on top her instead of Adrian didn't dampen her arousal in the slightest, not when she could imagine him kissing her so vividly, in fact, because it was him she remembered kissing so well, not Adrian. It pulled her in even deeper, sent a fresh wave of delicious heat flooding through her body. Her breathing deepened into uneven gasps and her hips rocked frantically against her hand. As she felt that invisible, special something wind tighter and tighter, like a coiled spring. Then, her breath caught in her chest as the muscles in her core spastically seized up, and her orgasm crashed over her like a great wave. She covered her mouth and nose with her other hand to muffle her strangled groan as she rode it out. She struggled to catch her breath as fingers gradually slowed Marinette vaguely wondered if she should be more bothered by the fact that she had just finished touching herself while fantasizing about Chat Noir. He sure hadn't been the boy she had intended to imagine kissing her torridly as he brought her to climax. On the other hand, fantasizing about Chat Noir didn't do him, or her, any harm, just as Tiki had said. It wasn't like Chat Noir could read her mind and know she had been thinking about the two of them doing those kinds of things together. Sexual fantasies were perfectly normal, she was just using her imagination to enhance the mood of her solo session. In fact, she realized she had been more frustrated about the fact that her thoughts of Chat Noir had interrupted her thoughts of Adrian more than the fact that she had thought of Chat Noir in the first place. Sure, she was surprised that it hadn't felt more awkward to think of Chat Noir that way, but the fantasy itself, it had worked. And that got her thinking. I can make educated guesses about what kind of a lover Adrian would be, just from what I know about his personality, she thought. But Chat Noir's actually shown me a little bit of his romantic side. I know now how he kisses the girl he loves for the first time. I know what it feels like to have him embrace me, and cup my face in his hands, and caress my cheek, and look at me with love in his eyes. It's only a glimpse, but it shows how he expresses affection. She felt her heart throb at the thought, and she shivered, her breath shuddering. I love Adrian, and I want to be with him, but he hasn't shown me how he feels about me. If he loves me, or could love me if he knew how I felt about him, I don't know. But I do know how Chat Noir feels. He showed me, and I felt happy. Really happy. And I felt so happy seeing how happy I made him feel. And when I see him again, I want to make him even happier. I want to share more with him. More hugs, more kisses, more touches, but also Marinette's brow furrowed as she stared up at her skylight. She felt like her heart was swelling up with too many emotions for it to contain. I want to know him better. We've been through so much together, and I've always cared about him a lot, and yet, we only ever see each other when we have to fight Hawkmoth's latest supervillain. We fight together, we save the day, then we go. I'd like to say I consider him my friend, but we don't do anything together that normal friends do, or know things about each other that normal friends know, like birthdays, or hobbies, or our dreams for the future. Marinette sat up suddenly, staring wide-eyed at nothing. Could we actually end up defeating Hawkmoth someday without ever getting to know each other beyond our superhero identities? I don't want that. That wouldn't be fair. Marinette scrambled to put her clothes back on, and then called for the one person she could talk to about her new feelings and revelations. Tiki. She called softly. Tiki came zooming up from down below, where she had no doubt been patiently hiding under the decorative pillow on the chaise. Yes. What's the matter?